Hello and welcome to Maximizing Cloud Investments, the new TCO Total Cost Optimization. Today's webinar is sponsored by Red Hat and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech Media and I'm excited to be your moderator for this discussion panel. Now, before we get to today's great content, we do have a few housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to your questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. The Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, and slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, next, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to a PDF about Red Hat OpenShift service on AWS. Also in there, you can find a link to the Actual Tech Media Guerrilla Guide Book Club, which is all of ATM's great printed resources on technology topics, as well as a link to the ATM Event Center, which has our calendar of upcoming events. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and colleagues. Next, at the end of this webinar event, we will be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. The official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the prize terms and conditions link there. So with all that out of the way, let's get to today's important conversation. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our rockstar panel today. We have Stu Miniman, who's Director of Market Insights on Hybrid Platforms for Red Hat and who owns a great collection of red hats and helmets that you'll see in a minute. We have Chuck Svoboda, who's Senior Director for Cloud Services Go-to-Market in the Americas for Red Hat. Red Hat has a special guest for the conversation, Dave Knight, who's a Senior Solutions Architect on the Red Hat Alliance team at Deloitte Consulting. And leading the discussion from Red Hat will be Marty Wesley, who is a Senior Product Marketing Manager at Red Hat. So I'm going to turn things over now to Marty to get the discussion started.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's discussion. Now, today we're going to be talking about how companies can optimize their IT spend. And I'm sure you've heard about TCO, or total cost of ownership, which is focused on assessing IT spend. But today we're going to reframe this discussion into total cost optimization, which involves driving IT spend to produce greater returns. So let's get started. So first up, I want to ask you, Dave, we've heard a lot about companies rushing to migrate to the cloud. But, how has this rush evolved over time, and how have companies gained a better understanding of what's involved in this type of migration?
Thanks, Martin. That's a great question. I think evolution is the perfect way to think of this, right? We've all been a part of the mass migration to cloud, right? The technology optimization and technology modernization efforts were greatly accelerated by the pandemic, and it was very much a let's get out of the data center business. I think that evolution, though, is a shift towards higher value, all right, and getting up the value chain. There certainly is value. Don't get me wrong. There certainly is value with getting out of the data center business. That tends to be more of a bottom line value, more of a cost savings play. And what we're starting to see from my clients that I speak with is an exploration of how do we increase that value up the value chain? How do we start getting more of a top line impact by leveraging cloud technologies, cloud approaches, by leveraging platforms like OpenShift to have some cost savings and some efficiencies there, but really working our way up the value chain. And that absolutely is an evolution that we're seeing our clients go through.
Yeah, that's great. And Chuck, building on that, as companies, evaluate their move to the cloud and look at moving up the value chain, what sort of factors should they use to evaluate, which cloud provider is right for them?
So each cloud vendor or hyperscaler, has unique value-laden services that you can't get in any other cloud, way beyond, just compute, network, and storage, right? So, first, look at, those base foundational pieces like compute, network, and storage. but then kind of look, what are the, higher order services, things like databases, messaging, application platforms, et cetera, that are unique to that cloud that really helps an organization, move the puck further, or move the ball further down the field at I would say at a higher productivity and an overall better return on their IT spend.
Yeah. So, Stu, one of the things that we've heard from customers or from proponents is that companies shouldn't just be looking to move to the cloud; that they should actually be looking at moving to a platform, right? And so, thinking about that, what are the considerations that companies should look for when they're evaluating what platform should they move to?
Sure. Marty, really to build on what Dave was talking about, really understanding, what is the differentiation for my environment and, where do I need to add value? So, when we move to the cloud, I can't just do things the way that I used to do things. Our friends at Amazon always like to say, you want to get rid of the undifferentiated heavy lifting that you're doing. If you're doing things the old way, you're probably not being as efficient. You're probably actually going to spend more on CapEx and OpEx if you go to the cloud and you don't do things differently. So the challenge is cloud can be really complicated. So right, when you talk about platforms, the cloud itself really is a platform. But if we look at, what is important, sure, I have the infrastructure, but the reason I have infrastructure is for my applications and my data. So, most of the customers we're talking to, we talk about, their application development and what goes on there. So what new applications are they building? What applications are they modernizing? And there's some that you might want to move over and then you can modernize at a later date. So containers and Kubernetes really are an important piece of that overall discussion of platforms. And what we built in OpenShift for really the last decade is to help customers accelerate what they're doing. Marty, you talked about that total evaluation if you need there. It's not just the cost of the infrastructure, but, my people. It's really the skill sets that they have. Most of our customers have data centers and are in more than one cloud. So are they doing the same work multiple times, but in different ways? Or can I have some consistency across all of our environments? That's one of the big things we've really focused on with the platform that we've built of OpenShift.
Yeah, so Stu, I'd like to delve down a little bit on that. I mean, you've talked about moving applications, but we're really talking about development and operations teams, and how does moving to a standard platform, help your development and operations teams in terms of cost optimization?
Yeah. So first of all, it is that consistency, because we know the only constant in our industry is change. So number one, where are my applications living? My development team, my operation teams, and even my security team want to have some consistency. And if they don't have a platform that they can build on that is consistent, they are going to have bespoke operations and have to learn skills for each individual cloud and each individual environment, as opposed to having consistency across their environments. The research we've done is, if you look at like the service that we're running on AWS, which we jointly engineer and jointly develop with them, customers can actually get rid of like half of the infrastructure management that they have. So, pure cost savings, but also, it's those skill sets. We know that our people are our most valuable resource. How do we train them? How do we get them up on the latest skills? What are the things that they need to worry about, and which ones don't they need to worry about? So we can actually shift a lot of that burden off of them so that the customer can spend more time on responding to their customers, responding to the business, building their applications, modernizing what they're working on, or working on specific things for their industry or their company.
Yeah.
Hey, Marty, can I add on to Stu a little bit here?
Absolutely, yeah. Go right ahead.
So Stu is hitting on some important points there. We talk about containers and Kubernetes. If I can go further down the stack, if you think from like an organizational standpoint of what we're focused on, AWS being obviously the oldest hyperscaler in terms of what we think of as a modern hyperscaler, when organizations started moving to AWS, it was just very simple services back then, like again EC2, compute, network, storage. Organizations realized it wasn't core to their business to rack, stack, cable, cool their own blades in a data center, and they wanted to kind of put that focus somewhere else, right? Put that focus and the responsibility on someone else, and that was Amazon. And then as more and more services get released to these clouds, organizations understand that these implementation details, while critically important to get right, really you don't want to think about it. It's kind of almost like the plumbing or the electrical wire in the walls of your house. They're really important to get right, but you don't really want to think about it every day, right? And I think what we're seeing more and more, we talk about these higher order, higher value platforms on top of these implementation details like OpenShift. What that is doing is kind of abstracting or minimizing the complexity of things like containers and Kubernetes, right? No organization outside of a software vendor, like Red Hat and our peers in the industry, business is containers and Kube, right? Those are implementation details. Those are enablers, again, critically important to get right. But I think what we're seeing more and more of is really unlocking the power of these technologies like containers and Kube, while again minimizing or even hiding fully the complexity so that these organizations can focus on what matters most. And that is the building, deploying, and running of these business critical, value laden applications, so that these 9-to-5 developers, the folks that make up the most of your productive capacity in your dev teams, they could just focus on what matters. Again, focus on writing code instead of focusing on writing Docker files and Kubernetes APIs and thinking about spinning up VMs, et cetera, et cetera. And platforms, application platforms like OpenShift are the enablers that allow that to happen. And from a total cost optimization standpoint, really enable organizations with the move to the cloud to maximize that ROI much more quickly than they ever could by, hand rolling and worrying about, again, all these underlying implementation, underlying tech details.
Yeah. And, one of the things that we've talked about various different clouds individually, but Dave, want to hear your experience with customers. What have you seen your customers doing related to multi-cloud? And in particular, how are they evaluating or how are they making that move to multi-cloud? Because, I've seen reports saying that a lot of customers are multi-cloud, but how did they get there and what are they evaluating and looking at, as they go forward?
Right. So it's an interesting question. I think we start with defining what multi-cloud is, because I speak to a lot of clients that have multiple clouds and are self-identified as multi-cloud when in actuality they're multiple vendors, right? And those to me are two different things, right? Multi-cloud is not multiple clouds, is not multiple vendors, right? Just to touch on a couple of points that Chuck and Stu have made too, right? It definitely is an application-centric view of the world. The sort of the mass migrations to cloud, historically, we're sort of in this evolution period, as I mentioned earlier, but historically, broad strokes, have been more on the infrastructure side, right? As Chuck has mentioned, that shift to an application-focused view of the world, which, by the way, is the point of IT after all, is what's driving a lot of this. And as Stu and Chuck have mentioned, there's this desire to build a stack, right? We start with infrastructure, we put some, maybe some database, middleware on top of that. Ultimately, we have an application. But whenever we get into multiple clouds, you're bifurcating or trifurcating your workforce, whether it's developers, whether it's IT, admin, security. You have to maintain knowledge around each one of the stacks. And that becomes cumbersome, unwieldy. You start to get into negative ROI situations because you're really running 3 IT shops if you have 3 clouds. Multi-cloud versus multiple cloud is the approach, and again, we're having conversations. We're starting to see clients go this way. Ironically, I'm seeing it most in the state government space, where they're interested in cloud and also have mainframe workloads, and they need to figure out a way to marry those together in this sort of a state of reality that they find themselves in. And platforms like OpenShift are the key enabler for that. I mean, there's lots of other things. We need people skills. We've got to put controls in place and all that. But from a technology perspective, these platforms, again, like OpenShift, with the advanced cluster management tools, advanced security. They are the key enabler for this multi-cloud reality, or let's say the step from multiple cloud to multi-cloud in an application-centric view of the world. And it really is starting to get away from this or discussion, right? Do I want to put workloads here or there? And getting into an and discussion. How do I make use of everything that I have? Quite frankly, how do I take a breath? When is there a moment for the dust to settle over the past 5 years of total craziness? Put some thinking into what I want, for my next sort of iteration of IT, and then let's build an architecture that supports an and view of the world, as opposed to how do I get here or there. And that's not to say that single vendor strategies are just flat out wrong. For many of our clients, it's the right answer. But architecting for the and possibility, and more intentionally building multi-cloud architectures by leveraging platforms like OpenShift are becoming the core part of the discussion.
Yeah, that's I think you're exactly right, and I also see customers that are drug into multi-cloud because of a lot of times legacy systems or other requirements.
Whether intentional or accidental, it's still a problem that we need to solve. And more we're shifting from the accidental to the intentional, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I was in a call with an analyst in a consulting firm last week, and the reason why we see this, this heterogeneous infrastructure, a lot of times they kept on bringing up, or a lot of what they heard from their, the organizations they interviewed, was because of mergers and acquisitions, right?
Yeah.
And, I don't know if you call that legacy, but inheriting, a lot of times an organization will inherit another cloud and will inherit another tool. Right. And you got to account for that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm going to stick with you, Chuck. We talked about early on, we were going to get into cost optimization. We've talked a lot about multi-cloud. We've talked about, migrating to platforms and doing so to have consistency for our, our people and our processes. Tell us a little bit more about cost optimization, how companies should approach it, and what are the skills and processes and operations that they should look to follow a cost optimization model.
Absolutely. So, again, cost optimization is different than cost of ownership, right? So we always get asked for TCO. So total cost of ownership. And then there's another TCO that we're talking about today, which is total cost optimization. To compare and contrast this, the total cost of ownership is just the cost of owning, operating, and, eventually retiring, something in our world, be, a platform, a software stack, what have you. That in a lot of cases is usually like a race to the bottom, right? That's a lower cost alternative, a lower price, technically acceptable, right? View of the world, but it doesn't really attack what I think is important to a lot of organizations out there. And that is, okay, so what is the total cost when you think about it through the lens of what am I getting back from my spend? Like for every dollar I spend, what is my outcome, right? And I think this is important because, no CFO on a quarterly earnings call is going to say, hey, we missed shipping this product, we missed shipping this application, but it's okay because we saved a few bucks on our IT spend. No one's going to say that, right? What's most important, again, is getting stuff out as quickly as possible to beat your competition and get it out with productivity, get it out efficiently. And again, this is the total cost optimization discussion, which is where you look at, yes, of course, your IT spend and being smart about it, but again, through the lens of what you're getting back. And, when you think about this, especially moving to the cloud, I think there's a few different contexts you can kind of view this through. One, let's start with kind of the lower level, and this would be more of a ops centric view, and that is, viewing how you're approaching the infrastructure or the services that you are going to be consuming in such a way that you truly understand the difference and how to take advantage of different instance types, whether it be compute optimized, memory optimized, network optimized, storage optimized, right? And the elasticity of that, right? And then as you get further up the stack in terms of how you are architecting your applications to take advantage of the, things like elasticity that the cloud provides. And then finally, that the highest order, which is where I like to talk about as much, and that's the application platform part, right? That's where the real development work happens. And in that case, when we think about OpenShift, we want, I think it was earlier, Stuart Dave was mentioning this consistency, right? So these kind of developer guardrails, as it were, that like your operators, your security admins, anyone who is in your ecosystem IT shop can set effective and safe policies that can, protect, spin from running amok or, something hostile or bad, getting out in an application, et cetera, so that your developers can just code, get pushed their way to production, right? And so a platform that does that, again, and back when my old developer days, I don't really code as much as I used to, but also back when I used to run dev teams, that was a really important part, right? I wanted my developers to not focus on anything that wasn't core to the application that's being deployed, and core being that is the business logic, that is what our end user ended up using, right? So I want a platform to handle all of that. And generally speaking, when a platform does handle all of that, yeah, it is a bit more expensive than buying a bunch of point products and then just kind of manually stitching them together into, what I like to refer to in some cases, or we like to refer to in some cases, as a Franken platform, right? But you make up for that little bit more expense earlier on because you're now getting a heck of a lot more out, right? So for example, one of my stints earlier in my career as a consultant, I was basically a fixer, right? So I would go in and look at a contract that we would win from an incumbent, assess the situation in terms of, okay, why did we win, and the incumbent lost and got pushed out. And what I found was, and 9 times out of 10, the case was because the delivery of the software just wasn't where it needed to be from a commitment standpoint. And a lot of that will weigh down to what we call productive capacity, right? So productive capacity is, how many hours a day, a work day, are your developers actually productive, right? And productive meaning they're actually getting real business code out, business logic out. And a rule of thumb I'd always use is I would assume that any developer was only productive 4 hours a day. That's crazy, right? Think of a work day, 8 hours, they're only productive for half of it, right? And this is important because if you take a requirement off a backlog and say, hey, this 8-hour requirement, you would think, oh, that just takes one man day. Well, in this case, it would take 2. So a turnkey application platform, something that's opinionated, prescriptive, that really, again, minimizes or hides a lot of the technical details, implementation details, against your developers can focus on, coding on the apps. We'd introduce a platform and we would take that productive capacity from 4 hours to 5 hours a day, and then 5 to 6, and then 6 to 7. I always tell us, like, I'll never get you to 8 because your developers are going to still kind of mess around on Facebook, answer emails, whatever, but that is huge. So that requirement that took nearly 2 days that you were paying a developer to do now can be done in nearly half the time, right? So that is why the ROI, that is where the justification is for, a bit more, premium price, premium experience platform comes into play here, because the most challenging, the most expensive part of IT will and always be people. So if we can introduce a platform that gets much more out of your people with the same spin, right? That's huge, right? And that's what I consistently remind, folks I speak with, especially like Red Hat Summit, recently, which was back in May. I talked to a lot of customers that were, kind of rolling their own thing, and they're 9 to 5 developers. They were spending a lot of time fighting, Kubernetes API objects, and I was like, gosh, well, there is something better out there. It doesn't have to be necessarily Red Hat, but there are better things out there so that your 9 to 5 developers can have a consistent experience. Again, is get pushing your way to product. And that's what most developers want to do in the first place. They want to see their code in production faster than anybody else's. Because as a developer myself, there is nothing more stifling to my psyche and detrimental to me than thinking that my code may never see the light of prod. And if I can have a platform that can help me do that quick and easy, right? Hey, I'm all for it.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And Stu, Chuck talked a lot about around the edges about what OpenShift can, do in terms of helping cost optimization. What can you tell us about, a little bit deeper about what sorts of things can OpenShift provide that give customers that optimized, spend?
Yeah. So we talked a bit about OpenShift as the platform, and where we took things going to the cloud is really that managed service offering. So customers, of course, can run OpenShift. They can do it themselves. They can run it in their data center. They can run it in the cloud. They can run it at the edge. But shifting to a managed service really allows customers to focus on what we talked about earlier, the things that are important to them overall. What I found really interesting looking at it is you would think it was some of the accounts, certain industries that don't have the skill set that say, oh, managed service, take this off our plate. Some of my favorite case studies have been software companies and SaaS providers where they have the skill set and they have the knowledge, but as one of our customers, Brightly, who's a software company, I think articulated greatly, they said, our DevOps resources are scarce, and boy, are they, as Chuck said, super valuable. So I would rather shift them to work on, new changes to the application, running new things, maybe even creating, new revenue streams for us rather than, putting together and managing that platform themselves. The research that we've looked at is, developers should be able to get at least 20% of their time back. And as Chuck pointed out, that's so critically important that, we want to be able to, have the developers, work on what they're doing. And, the concern sometimes with DevOps is, hey, you build it and you run it. But Chuck and Dave both talked about innovation. Our managed service team likes to talk about taking you off of 24/7 operation and let you focus on 9 to 5 innovation. So it's pretty powerful to talk about what you can shift. We're the experts. It's more like, buying things off the shelf rather than, I love Chuck's analogy of the Franken platform that you have, because once you build it, you own it. And therefore, we often don't think about, oh, okay, I got it running and it wasn't too bad. But, oh my gosh, we know everything in the cloud is changing constantly. And all of those pieces, I'm constantly going to have to spend time weaving them together and maintaining them. And the last thing you want is, if you need to respond to the business, respond to the customer, say like, hey, hold on, I need to spend another couple of weeks or a month getting the platform fixed when, the whole reason we go to cloud and think about application modernization is to accelerate what we're doing, not slow things down.
Yeah. And Dave, how have you seen cost optimization implemented in your clients and the customers that you work with?
It's almost an echo of what we heard from Chuck and Stu. You sort of talked on or spoke to something that's pretty near and dear to my heart as well. For me, the discussions I'm having, it's like TCO, legacy TCO, right? Total cost of ownership meets ROI, right? The other way I like to think of it, and Chuck, you touched on this, is you have to think of IT legacy TCO, total cost of ownership, outside the confines of IT, right? Because Chuck, as you said, nobody's going to get on an earnings call and say we missed our target, but we saved a few bucks. Like, that's never going to come out of anybody's mouth. And more often than not, we're finding we do some in-depth analysis. You don't actually save any money. You end up spending that money elsewhere, right? And so the optimization part of what I would say is TCO now versus TCO a few years ago, it is looking more broadly. Am I increasing or decreasing my security threat vector cross section? Am I increasing or decreasing my developer productivity? Chuck, to your point, and Stu, you touched on this as well. I wrote an article on Wired.com 4 years ago about optimizing for a platform so your developers can develop instead of sitting in meetings all day long discussing what tools do I use and how do I get this provisioned and how do I get the security controls in place. Build the guardrails into the platform, go develop on the platform, spend your days developing, spend your days getting your code to production. But the optimization discussion for me is about having a broader lens, looking at IT in the context of a broader enterprise, and how do I optimize for everything, including application delivery, including security, including things like human capital. Where do my skills lie? Those broader topics, which typically impact IT delivery schedules, need to be included in those calculations when you move from ownership to optimization.
Yeah. And Dave, you mentioned security. You brought that up, and that's obviously something that's always top of mind for companies. How can you factor security into something like cost optimization? I mean, that's something that's very kind of, sometimes security has a nebulous value, I think, or sometimes people have a tough time ascribing a value to security, right?
It's hard to quantify,
right.
But if you've ever had a breach and been on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, you know the value very near and dear, right? We have a separate organization internally at Deloitte that handles security, so I tend to focus more on leveraging them when we get into these detailed discussions. But by and large, not as an expert on this particular aspect, it's all about assigning value to risk, right? Security is, clearly one aspect of risk, but trying to understand our clients' appetite for risk, and I struggle with the words there because I know nobody really has appetite for risk, right? But risk is inherent in every system. So how do we mitigate it? How do we associate costs with that risk? And then how do we, sort of optimize that profile as almost a mini project and a total optimization? Security is a huge part of this. The biggest thing that I've seen is we've all seen, I would say 10 years ago, the standard application stack. You got infrastructure at the bottom, and then maybe some databases, middleware applications, and then off to the side you've got like security, right? And it's meant to depict that it runs through everything, but it really is off to the side. It really was off to the side. For the longest time, that was identity and access management, full stop. That has changed. Now, security is inherent in everything, and it's gone from sort of the left-hand or right-hand column to be more integral in everything. Building that into every step of the way, from application design to build to operate, day two and beyond. We've talked a little about operating, Stu. I don't want to miss highlighting a point. It's not security, but you hit the nail on the head. We have lots of clients that are interested in things like OpenShift, but they don't want to get into the OpenShift business. And that's where a managed service is absolutely the right answer for them. And doing that in a way that is secure. And so we speak about, day one, going live. We talk to them about day two, but what we also talk about is day 365, right? Everybody thinks day two is like day two and beyond. We have very focused discussions on year one, year 5. What's that going to look like? And if you really want to get in the build it yourself business, do you want to stay in that business for any long period of time? Why not transition to the buy it model now? But again, back to your question, security is key to it. And really it's about putting prices on risk and then factoring that into the equation to make decisions based on that is yet another, sort of lever to pull on.
Yeah, and Marty, actually, if I can share, one of our customers, I think, articulated quite well, how to put a value on security when it comes to this platform, because they have certain times, they use OpenShift mostly, but there's sometimes they need to use other Kubernetes, just an application certified first or some other reason. And he said, from the bank standpoint, when they use that other Kubernetes, their team needs to spend a bunch of time locking everything down and securing all of the pieces, as opposed to OpenShift itself comes with everything completely locked down. You need to open up a port, make sure then I can use it. So just that time to value and how much effort is maintained to, get that security state or keep that security state. There's just such a focus that we have at Red Hat at every level of the stack, from security versus if you're building that yourself and having to maintain that security state.
I'm shocked no one's mentioned DevSecOps yet. That's like is that passe?
How much time do we have left?
It's funny that, DevSecOps, introducing Sec or talking about FinOps or whatever. It's funny. We like to kind of play off those words, or the industry likes to play off those words to get people to talk about it. And security is being just part of the SDLC and not just like some sort of ancillary process or team is critical, right? And that's because if it is just this extra step and rather than it's just part of the process, it adds time, it causes problems, it's easy to circumvent, and then obviously that's a huge risk. Years ago, a friend of mine and we were presenting, I can't remember what conference it was, and we came up with this idea. It was a breakout session. We called it, everybody's talking about DevSecOps, and we were talking about like, okay, let's call Sec DevSecOps Sec, right? And the idea was that every step of the way, you thought about security. So let's start with the first Sec. The first Sec is, you need to have runtimes, your software supply chain, the things that you're building your apps with need to be secure. They need to be trusted, right? The dev that's building your software, that's the development, right? The next Sec, right, that is ensuring that what was built is still adhering to the security policies and is going to respect the policies of your operations, your IA teams, et cetera, right? Ops is deploying and running the application, right? So that's the ops part. And then the last Sec is continuous security, right? That's doing things like, ensuring that we're keeping our eye on anything's deployed when a 0-day comes out, or, zero trust networking or anything else like that, right? And so keeping this kind of end-to-end continuum, because, security is like mowing your lawn. As soon as you cut a blade, it keeps growing, right? You got to keep on top of it. That is really important to do. And then from a cloud perspective, from a platform perspective, you have this foundation, especially when you talk about cloud services, that makes the Sec, Dev, Sec, Ops, Sec, every step in the way much easier. So let's talk about like Amazon and Azure. You have these data centers that are by default secure, right? And come out and ship a lot of their services, including our cloud services like Rosa and Arrow, respectively, with PCI DSS on, ready to go, HIPAA, things like that, right? Get federated, all these different certifications, compliance accreditations, whatever flavor you're talking about, that are on by default always. And one of the biggest ones that goes way, way, way back with Red Hat, when you talk about applications deployed on OpenShift, it's SC Linux and SEC on by default always. So your applications always benefit from that, right? That are deployed, instead of having your developers, your operators, your platform engineers having to configure and handle that for each application that's deployed, right? So anything that makes it easier, puts organizations in a much, much better security posture that is much more consistent no matter where they go.
Yeah. We are reaching the limits of our time, but I do want to ask each of our panelists, I'll start with you, Dave. We know that there are a lot of customers out there that are really just kind of beginning this journey, and they're not always sure where to start. So if you had to give them, your one, core piece of advice of where should I start my process for, towards cost optimization, what is the one thing that you would suggest they set up, or the resource they hire or train, or technology that they adopt?
Yeah, so great question. I as a consulting firm, I would always say, give us a call. We can help you on that journey, right? But in all seriousness, I think any good journey starts with a realistic assessment of what you have and where you want to go, right? There's a myriad of different pathways usually to get from point A to point B, but taking stock and honestly, like, what do you have? And that's not just IT. do I have IT and I have contracts? Do I have, people? Do I have a skills gap? Do I have, Chuck, to your point, do I have developers that are working on actual development 3 hours a day? It's a big ask and it's a heavy lift, and that's why, we certainly can help. But taking stock, taking inventory of where you are is always a good first step.
Got it. Yeah, good point. Stu, your thought. Where should a company start in their journey?
Yeah, so, my recommendation would be you want to learn from your peers. So, we're multiple years into this journey. We've got lots of resources online to be able to help. As Dave said, we've got partners like Deloitte to help out in this area. So lots of good resources. We've got tons of case studies online, as well as communities like OpenShift Commons that people can go to, learn the tech, learn from their peers, and find some good resources there.
Don't reinvent a wheel. Right? I mean,
exactly.
Learn from what you've got. And Chuck, bring it home. How would you suggest, companies get started with their cost optimization?
Start with Rosa and Arrow. How about that? Okay. I mean, it's, in all seriousness though, to what Stu was saying, learning from your peers, right? I mean, if you think about, heck, we cannot not talk about containers and Cube. Cube has been out, it's July, right? But 8 years. Right. Mm-hmm. And I remember in the earlier days, Cube was seen as this engine or framework for a company like Red Hat to build a turnkey app platform with. And over the years, I think something happened where every company then thought that, we should make our own app platform at Cube and a gajillion different things that are in the CNCF landscape, right? And creating these Franken platforms. And now you are locked into this like Franken thing that you built that doesn't exist anywhere else, which makes it much harder to learn from your peers and what Stu is saying, right? So, what I remind everyone is, organizations, like everyone thinks that they're snowflakes, right? That, I have a problem that's never been seen before, right? And I am so special that I have to, configure, consume this specific tool that is usually probably at a high cost because my problem is so unique. But I would remind everyone is that all snowflakes are made of water, right? And I think that that's probably an oversimplification in a lot of cases. So just maybe a step further would be water comes in 3 forms. So what are the things that are, close enough, 80% to what you are encountering that someone else in the industry is? That you could build off of and kind of take what they've learned so you don't have to, again, as Stu said, reinvent the wheel. One of the great things about partnering with Red Hat, partnering with Deloitte, partnering with a cloud provider, right, is that we've seen it all in most cases. So there's a level of knowledge that we bring that it's very difficult for individual organizations to hire for, to bring in, right, into the fold. The other thing I will say too is for anyone starting out, and this is a very quick second to the first thing you need to do, is when you turn on your cloud service, be very aware of the cost, right? You need to be very aware of, like as I said earlier, your architecture, ensuring that you're using the right instance types, understanding that when you're doing a pay-go, buy-the-drink model, it's like leasing a car. And if you're going to drive that car 100,000 miles, you're going to pay a lot in overage, right? So be very smart with that, because I've seen so many organizations in early months get burned. I know one very recently that spent, I think it was their entire 6 months budget in like less than 6 weeks. And they didn't even realize it until the first bill came. So there are ways to be real smart about it. Everyone on this call, including our partners out there, can advise you on it, but that's something you got to keep a real good eye on. Otherwise, you get started and you're like, oh my God, this cloud thing is way too expensive. The reality is, it is if you have no discipline in terms of ensuring operational excellence, operational efficiency, maintain a complete adherence and discipline to total cost optimization so that your dollar goes as far as it should.
Okay, great insights. And that looks like all we have time for today. I want to thank our panelists for all of their insights. And I want to thank all of you for attending. Now, if you'd like to learn more about what you've heard today, you can contact Red Hat at 888-RED-HAT-1 or contact Deloitte, or you can go to redhat.com. Thank you all once again, and have a great day.
Man, I could have been a fly on the wall for that conversation all day. Really good stuff. Thanks to Marty, Stu, Chuck, and Dave for putting together a really informative presentation and for all your insights there. Unfortunately, we didn't have time left over for questions, but we'll get all your questions over to the Red Hat team for possible follow-up. So our last order of business here today is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card today is James Ravello from Pennsylvania. So congratulations to James. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Red Hat for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending. That concludes today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.